The church doors burst open so hard that even the choir stopped mid-hymn. Heads turned. The old organ wheezed in protest. And there she was, Lydia Daniels, standing at the altar in a borrowed white gown that looked more tired than holy. The hem was already tearing, and her trembling hands clutched a half-wilted bouquet that had seen better days. The groom waiting for her was a stranger, a tall, quiet man with a deep scar slicing across his cheek like a reminder from a past no one wanted to mention. The hall went silent. You could almost hear the judgmental whispers sneaking through the air-conditioned room. Then, a voice sharper than a new razor cut through the silence. Madam Janet Morgan, Lagos' most feared society matron and the woman currently wearing too much gold for one human neck, stood from the front pew and said coldly, "You'll marry that man, Lydia, or your brother will rot in prison. Choose love or choose blood." The guests gasped. Even the pastor blinked like he wasn't being paid enough for this drama. Lydia's throat tightened. The gown suddenly felt heavier, tighter, like a noose disguised in lace. She forced a weak smile for the cameras, but her mind screamed, "How did my life end up as a bad Nollywood movie?" 72 hours earlier, the police station smelled like sweat, cheap coffee, and regret. The kind of place where hope comes to faint. Lydia stood by the dusty counter, staring through a dirty glass partition at her younger brother Toby. His eyes were red, his shirt crumpled, and his spirit looked half-broken. "I swear, sis, I didn't steal that generator," he said, his voice cracking. Lydia blinked. "A generator? Toby, please tell me you didn't carry someone's Geno." "No, I was just delivering fabric to Chief Morgan's house. Next thing, police came for me." Of course, it had to be Chief Morgan, the same big man whose kind of money came with silent consequences. The charge? Theft of an imported Moano generator worth $850,000, which, if you ask any Nigerian tailor, could buy 12 sewing machines, 30 rolls of Ankara, and still leave change for suya. The evidence? None. The CCTV mysteriously malfunctioned, and the only witness was the estate gateman, probably reading from a well-paid script. The bail? 2.5 million. Lydia's salary as a seamstress? 15,000 a week. Even if she stopped eating, breathing, and existing, she couldn't raise that money in a century. The officer had looked at her with pity. "Madam, if you no get collateral 3 times the bail, he go stay till trial." She had walked home in the rain that evening, carrying her bag of fabric samples, blue dye leaking all over her hands like the colour of hopelessness. That Sunday, Lagos decided to show her who really ran the streets. Nipa took light, her gas finished mid-cooking, and her landlord was knocking for rent. As she tried to finish a bridesmaid gown by candlelight, there was another knock, soft but confident. She opened the door and almost choked. Madam Janet Morgan, the wife of the same chief whose generator was stolen, stood at her door. She was draped in a wrapper that cost more than Lydia's rent for the year. Behind her stood her driver, holding an umbrella like her personal Statue of Liberty. Madam Janet didn't wait for an invitation. She swept into the one-room apartment like she owned the building. Her perfume alone was enough to choke all the mosquitoes into submission. "You sew well," she said, scanning the room. "Such talent wasted on cheap people's weddings." Lydia stayed by the door, hands folded. "Ma, why are you here?" Madam Janet sat on the only chair in the room like a queen on her throne. "Your brother's case, pitiful situation, but you see the prosecutor is my cousin. The magistrate, my husband's golf partner. You do the maths," Lydia frowned. "Toby didn't do it, Ma. He's innocent." Madam Janet smiled the kind of smile that could curdle milk. "Ah, my dear, innocence is for those who can afford lawyers. In Nigeria, guilt is a luxury you pay to remove. But I can help you." Lydia's heart raced. "Help me? How?" Janet leaned closer, her gold bangles jingling. "Not everything is about money. I want something else. Ma, I have nothing to give you." "Oh, but you do." She smiled again, slow and dangerous. "I have a man. He needs a wife immediately. You need your brother released. Simple transaction." Lydia's voice trembled. "A wife? What kind of man?" Madam Janet sat back, adjusting the huge brooch shaped like a lion's head. "His name is David Morgan, my husband's nephew. Ex-convict, served time for fraud. Not violent, but society doesn't forgive easily. You marry him and your brother walks out of that cell before sunrise. You refuse, your brother gets 7 years minimum." Lydia's knees went weak. She thought of Henry, the shy math teacher who brought her poetry books and small chops after church. She thought of her late mother's warning. A woman's pride is her last inheritance. Don't trade it, no matter the hunger. "Why does your nephew need a wife so badly?" she whispered. Janet stood, brushing imaginary dust from her wrapper. "He has his reasons. What matters is your answer. You have 48 hours. She paused at the door. "And Lydia? Girls like you were made to clean up problems for people like us. Don't forget your level." The door closed. The smell of her perfume lingered long after she was gone, like the scent of trouble. Monday evening. At the church courtyard. The compound was empty, except for the sound of distant bells and one stubborn goat chewing near the fence. Lydia came early, wearing a faded pink blouse and her mother's scarf. He was already there, sitting under a jacaranda tree. The man she was supposed to marry. David Morgan. He wasn't what she expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. His scar caught the dying sunlight, a pale line against his dark skin. "Miss Lydia," he said softly, his English crisp but humble. "Thank you for coming." She stayed near the gate. "Your aunt said you need a wife." He chuckled dryly. "She exaggerates. What I need is peace, but she wants control." Lydia folded her arms. "So this marriage thing, what's your gain?" David sighed. "It's complicated. I made enemies when I tried to expose a corporate scam. I went to prison for speaking too much truth. Now I just want to live quietly. And you," he paused, eyes softening, "you want your brother free." Lydia looked away, pretending to adjust her scarf. "You talk like one of those motivational speakers that cry on TikTok." He smiled faintly. "And you talk like someone who's been hurt too many times." The silence between them stretched. Awkward, heavy, yet not entirely uncomfortable. Finally, Lydia said quietly, "So, if I say yes, my brother walks free?" David nodded. "Before the wedding bells stop ringing." Lydia exhaled, half laughing, half crying. "God, this life is like Nollywood Part 2, where the poor girl marries a stranger just to save her family." David's voice was low. Sometimes strange beginnings hide peaceful endings. She didn't believe him, but she wanted to. And somewhere between fear and sarcasm, between broken dreams and survival instincts, Lydia Daniels said the words that would change her life forever. "Fine, I'll marry you, but if you snore loud, I'm moving out." David laughed quietly, the sound sad and soft. "Deal." The jacaranda leaves fell between them like witnesses to an unholy pact. But then Lydia folded her arms and stared at the man sitting across from her like he had just confessed to being both a saint and a sinner in the same breath. "You went to prison," she said quietly. David nodded. "I did." No excuses, no tears, no pity party, just a plain confession served like cold Gary. For what? For fraud. He paused, then added with a bitter laugh, "Correction, for exposing fraud." Lydia blinked. "Ah? You mean you were punished for telling the truth?" "Welcome to Nigeria," he said, smiling faintly, "where truth is like pepper. Speak it too much and you'll burn someone's eye." He rubbed the scar on his wrist like it had something to say too. 5 years, for reporting what others were busy sharing in brown envelopes. The judge's cousin owned the company. So guess who ended up in Kirikiri? Me? Lydia's heart squeezed. The man didn't talk like the criminals her neighbour, Mama Eno, used to gossip about. His fingernails were neat, his shirt ironed, and he smelled faintly of sandalwood, not the usual "I just came from mile 12" scent. Something about him didn't fit Madame Janet Morgan's story of that ex-convict who begged for a wife like he was buying gala on the road. She studied him again. "Then why do you need a wife badly enough to accept this kind of arrangement?" David's jaw tightened. "Because Madame Janet holds something over me too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I can't explain everything yet, but if you ever decide to trust me, open this. Only when you're ready." He placed the envelope on the bench between them like it was a live grenade, then stood up. "You don't owe me an answer right now, but your brother's trial is in 10 days, and Madame Janet's signature as guarantor is the only thing keeping him from going to prison. I wish I could offer better options." Lydia stared at him, her heart racing. "If I agree, what happens? We marry in 3 weeks. You stay in your lane, I stay in mine. After 1 year, we dissolve it quietly. Your brother stays free. You get your life back. And if I refuse?" David's eyes softened with something between pity and warning. "Then I'm sorry for what happens next." He began to walk away, then stopped at the gate. "One more thing," he said over his shoulder. That generator your brother supposedly stole? Madam Janet's son, Tony, sold it to pay off gambling debts. I have proof, but truth without power is just noise. He disappeared into the Lagos evening, traffic horns, suya smoke, and the chaos of people chasing survival. Lydia sat there like a statue with the envelope in her trembling hands. Inside the nearby church, the choir started singing, Even Though I Walk Through the Valley. Lydia didn't feel fearless. She felt like a woman buried alive by other people's greed. Still, she opened the envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten in clean, careful strokes. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you hope and a future. And below it a number labelled emergency only. That night, Lydia didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Toby's face through the glass in that filthy police cell. His eyes, tired, scared, hopeful. By morning, her decision was made. She didn't say yes because she believed in love. She said yes because sometimes survival doesn't come wearing a crown. It comes wearing handcuffs. By noon, Madam Janet's assistant, a tall, polished woman who smelled of imported arrogance, delivered the wedding paperwork. The date is fixed, she said, tapping her long red nails on the folder. 3 weeks from now, venue, Grande Vista Hotel, Victoria Island. 200 guests, strictly from Madam Janet's circle. You can't invite anyone. Then she handed Lydia a card. For your dress. Go there tomorrow. Lydia stared at the card. An expensive boutique she'd only ever passed by on bus rides. Then she tore it neatly in two. If I'm going to wear a noose, she muttered, I'll sew it myself. That night, her old sewing machine came alive, humming like a tired generator. White lace from the church's charity bin. Ivory satin she bought with the last of her savings. Every stitch was a prayer. Every thread a small rebellion. The dress came to life slowly, plain, simple, elegant, long sleeves, high neck, no glitter, just peace. On the 5th night, Mama Grace from church showed up with a covered bowl of jollof rice. You're making your own wedding dress? The elderly woman asked softly, lowering herself to the floor. Lydia nodded without looking up. Yes, Ma. Just like your mother did, Mama Grace said with a knowing smile. Lydia froze. Mama married for love. The woman chuckled. Your mama married a man the world called poor, but love is a language only 2 people need to understand. Lydia sighed. This isn't love, it's a transaction. Then why are you sewing it with so much care? Lydia looked down and noticed the small purple flowers she had embroidered along the hem without realizing. Her hands had done it on their own, adding beauty to a prison uniform. Because even caged birds still sing, she murmured. Mama Grace touched the flowers gently. Child, sometimes God hides blessings inside bruised packages. Watch that man's eyes, not his scars. 2 days later, groceries arrived at her door. Rice, yam, palm oil, and a small packet of coconut chin-chin. She hadn't told anyone she loved those. On Thursday, Toby called from an unknown number. They moved me to a cleaner cell, sis. Did you do something? Lydia smiled sadly. No, but I know who did. On Saturday, a small package came, a silver bracelet, a note that said, for strength, you don't have to wear it, but it's yours. She wore it. It felt like an anchor in a storm she didn't choose. By evening, went to a cyber cafe in Surrey, N200 for 30 minutes. She typed, David Morgan fraud conviction 2018. Slow internet. Slow truth. The first article loaded, whistleblower jailed after exposing N2 billion embezzlement. Her heart stopped. He hadn't been a thief. He'd been the only honest man in a room full of liars. Lydia leaned back in her seat, eyes wet. Maybe the cage she was in wasn't hers alone. Maybe they were both prisoners of the same cruel system. 4 days before the wedding, Madam Janet summoned her to the Wheatbaker Hotel. Lydia arrived in her church dress, bracelet hidden under her sleeve. Madam Janet sat there sipping champagne like someone celebrating other people's suffering. You've been quiet, she said with a smirk. I like that, but there's one last thing before your wedding. Lydia stayed standing. The contract was marriage. I'm marrying him. Yes, dear, Madam Janet said sweetly. But at the reception, you'll give a speech. You'll thank me publicly for helping a poor girl like you marry a man everyone rejected. You'll mention how grateful you are for saving your criminal brother. It'll be inspiring. Lydia's voice turned cold. So you want me to humiliate him? I want you to remember your place, Madam Janet replied, eyes narrowing. Or perhaps Toby's cell becomes unsafe. You know how these things happen." For a long moment, Lydia said nothing. Then she smiled faintly, that dangerous kind of smile that comes before thunder. "I'll marry him," she said quietly. "I'll stand beside him, but I won't be your puppet." Madame Janet's champagne glass froze mid-air. "That wasn't our agreement." "Then maybe you should have written it in blood," Lydia said, turning for the door. As she walked out, her heart pounded, but her spirit stood tall. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm done being afraid." Outside the hotel, Lagos was in its usual mood, loud, sweaty, impatient. Hawkers were screaming, "Gala and Lacasera! Gala and Lacasera!" like national anthem. Buses honked as if the horns were being paid per blast. And there sat Lydia in the back of a tinted black car, clutching her phone, like her life depended on it. Her hands trembled as she dialed David's number. He picked up before the second ring. "Lydia?" His voice came calm, too calm, like someone who had already made peace with the chaos. "She's threatening your brother, right?" "Madame Janet wants me to embarrass you at the wedding." I refused. "And now I know. She's planning something worse." Lydia's breath hitched. "Toby, I already handled it," David interrupted gently. "Your brother's being moved tonight. Protective custody. A lawyer I trust has filed an emergency motion. Madame Janet's access is gone. She can't touch him again." Lydia blinked in disbelief. How did you even?" He sighed. "Just trust me for 48 more hours, Lydia. That's all I need. Can you do that?" Her voice came out small. "Who are you, really?" There was a pause, then his voice dropped lower. "Someone who was powerless once, but not anymore. And neither are you, if you let me help." "Why?" she whispered. "Why do all this for me?" "Because nobody did it for me," he said simply. "And because you embroidered purple flowers on a wedding dress you hate. That takes more courage than most people have." Lydia didn't even know how to reply. Before she could find words, the line went dead. The next morning, Mama Grace arrived at Lydia's tiny apartment with her usual energy. One wrapper tied tight around her waist, another tossed over her shoulder like a cape. She fastened the last button on Lydia's homemade gown and smiled through watery eyes. "This dress ends," she said softly, touching the embroidered flowers. "You sewed pain into beauty, my child." Lydia smiled faintly at the mirror. Maybe pain deserves a pretty cover sometimes. Mama Grace chuckled. "You know that watch David always wears? The silver one with all the tiny scratches?" Lydia nodded. "I've seen it before," Mama Grace said, her tone dropping. "On the wrist of the man who donated 50 million naira to rebuild our church after the 2919 flood." Lydia froze. 50 million? "Yes-o! He just came. Gave the check, refused pictures and left. But that watch, that's the kind diplomats wear, the kind that says my driver carries my worries." Lydia's heartbeat stumbled. "Who exactly is this man I'm marrying?" Mama Grace smiled knowingly. "Someone who knows what it means to be underestimated, my dear." The wedding convoy pulled up outside the Grand Lagos Hotel, a venue that smelled of old money, fresh lilies and fake smiles. As the car rolled in, Lydia looked out the window. Lagos flashed past, markets and mansions, Danfers and Bentleys, beggars and billionaires, a city where suffering and success lived in the same traffic. She touched the tiny purple flowers on her dress and whispered, "I chose to put beauty here. That choice is still mine." The car door opened. Cameras flashed instantly. Madame Janet had arrived earlier, sitting proudly in the front row, wearing a gold lace dress that probably cost a civil servant's salary for 3 years. Her brooch, a golden fist, glinted under the chandeliers like it was winking at the devil. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of wealth. Politicians' wives, businessmen pretending not to be corrupt, and socialites adjusting their wigs for Instagram. The violinist began to play Canon in D, that famous wedding song Lydia didn't even pick. She walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no mother to whisper blessings, just her and 200 strangers whispering behind lace fans. "The orphan girl marrying the ex-convict," one woman whispered. "Desperate times," another replied. Lydia kept her chin high. If shame was the price of saving Toby, then she'd wear it like perfume. At the altar, David stood waiting. Dark suit, calm eyes, scar on his jaw catching the light, the same scar she'd once imagined tracing with her fingers. He looked powerful, yet strangely peaceful, like a man who already knew the ending of a movie everyone else was still watching. Their eyes met. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something deeper. Recognition. Two people who had both been broken and still showed up. Pastor Adewale opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words blurred into background noise. Lydia could feel Madame Janet's stare boring holes through her back. The old woman's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Then it happened. The side door swung open. A tall man in a black magistrate robe entered, flanked by two clerks. His face looked familiar, from newspapers maybe. Gasps filled the room. "Your Honour!" Pastor Adewale stammered. "We weren't expecting." "Please continue," the magistrate said coolly. "I'm here as a witness, a very interested witness." Madame Janet twitched, just for a second, but Lydia saw it. That small crack in her confidence. David squeezed Lydia's hand. His grip was steady, reassuring. Pastor Adewale cleared his throat. "Do you, Lydia Adams, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Lydia looked up at David. He met her gaze. Calm. "Sure." "Trust me," his eyes said. "I do," she whispered. The pastor turned to David. "And do you, David Morgan, take this woman?" "Wait," David said suddenly, his voice slicing through the silence. Every head turned. Phones came out faster than prayers at a night vigil. "I have something to say before I say I do," he said, turning to face the crowd, and then Madame Janet. Her smirk faltered. David's voice was strong but calm. "My name is David Morgan, but that's not all I am. 6 years ago, I was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a fraud I didn't commit. I was jailed for exposing a 2 billion corruption ring, one that involved my father's old company." A murmur rolled through the hall like thunder over Third Mainland Bridge. David continued. "The case was overturned by the Supreme Court 18 months ago, but by then my reputation was gone. I rebuilt quietly, brick by brick. Today the company you all know as Morgan Industries, worth 45 billion naira, belongs to me." "What?" The room exploded. Phones flashed, wigs tilted, one old woman nearly fainted. Lydia froze. 45 billion? The groceries? Toby's transfer. The lawyer. It was him. All of it. Madame Janet stood, her face losing colour faster than a cheap Ankara fabric in rain. "This is a lie. He's lying," David smiled, the slow, dangerous kind. "Then perhaps you'll recognise this," he said, unclasping his wristwatch and holding it up. The silver glinted under the lights, engraved with Morgan & Sons Limited, 1983. "This belonged to my father," he said softly. "The company you tried to buy for half its worth when I was in prison. The same company you wanted to use this woman to secure." Gasps. Phones. Chaos. "Madame Janet," the magistrate said sternly, standing now, "you may want to sit down before you embarrass yourself further." But David wasn't done. 3 weeks ago, he continued, Madame Janet approached me with a deal, a marriage to rehabilitate my image in exchange for access to my company. When I refused, she decided to blackmail me using Lydia's brother. "Lies!" Madame Janet screamed. David raised his hand. "Show them." The projector lit up. Text messages appeared, enlarged, crystal clear. "Madame Janet, the girl is manageable, desperate, perfect leverage. Unknown number. What if she refuses? Then her brother stays in custody. She won't refuse." The crowd gasped collectively. Someone whispered, "No, what-oh! See wickedness in human form." Madame Janet stumbled back, her face ghost white. The Grand Orchid Hotel ballroom could slice bread. That's how thick the tension was. The violins stopped mid-note. Every camera light in the room blinked red like judgment eyes, ready to stream the chaos live to the whole of Lagos. The magistrate, a tall, no-nonsense man with glasses that screamed, "I don't take rubbish," rose from his seat. His voice cut through the noise like a knife through soft agay bread. Madame Janet Morgan," he said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of a thunderstorm. "I suggest you remain seated." You could have heard a pin drop. Madame Janet froze mid-step, her gold brooch glinting like a bad omen, the same brooch she had proudly pinned to her chest all morning, acting like it was her royal crown. Then, boom, the projector flickered on. Everyone turned. On the giant screen behind the altar, a series of files opened. Bank records, video clips, text messages, Lagos gossip heaven. David Morgan, the supposed ex-convict, didn't even flinch. His voice stayed cool, surgical, the kind of calm that makes you realise the other person came ready for war. 2 months ago, David began, his baritone steady. Madame Janet's only son, Tony, sold his father's imported generator to settle a gambling debt of 650,000 naira. Gasps echoed. Chief Morgan's mouth dropped like a man watching his entire life's dignity crumble. When Chief Morgan discovered the generator was missing, David continued, Tony blamed Toby, a delivery boy who had just dropped off supplies at the estate that same day. On the screen, a video started playing, CCTV footage from Madam Janet's compound. Tony was seen smiling and collecting cash from some shady-looking man while loading the heavy generator into a pickup truck. Timestamp, 3 hours before Toby's arrest. The entire hall erupted. "Jesu! Oh no!" Voices from every corner. Phones came up like guns. This was Lagos, after all. If it's not on video, it didn't happen. David smirked slightly. The footage Madam Janet claimed was deleted. My IT team pulled it from the cloud backup. Because in this life, madam, you can delete sin, but you can't delete digital evidence. Laughter rippled through the room. Even the pastor chuckled before catching himself. Lydia's knees buckled and David quickly steadied her. She looked at him, the man who'd been quiet, mysterious, and wrongly judged, now tearing down the empire of a woman who treated her like dust. David turned to face the crowd again. Madam Janet then used the false arrest of Toby to force Lydia into this marriage, he said, his voice lowering, every word slicing deep. She wanted to control me through my wife, use her as a pawn to gain business contracts and stay relevant in Lagos high society. The crowd booed. Someone even shouted, "Old woman," from the back. Janet's composure cracked. She stood up, face red with fury, and tried to storm out. But 2 hefty men in black suits, definitely not hotel staff, blocked her path. Their movements screamed federal government-level security. Magistrate Adeyemi stepped forward, waving a document. "Madam Janet Morgan," he announced, "you are hereby placed under provisional detention pending formal charges of coercion, false imprisonment, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Gasps filled the room again. The magistrate's tone didn't change. Man had probably done this 100 times before breakfast. "This court order," he continued, "was signed this morning after new evidence was presented by Mr. David Morgan's legal team. Your son Tony has already confessed to the theft and implicated you." That one landed like thunder. Madam Janet froze. Her perfectly powdered face cracked, literally and emotionally. The crowd exploded in murmurs. Every phone camera zoomed in like it was CNN breaking news. As the guards escorted her out, Janet turned one last time, her voice dripping with venom. "You will always be nothing, Lydia. A tailor's daughter pretending to be a lady." Lydia straightened her back and looked her dead in the eye. "You're right," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I'm a tailor's daughter, but at least I don't stitch lies and wear them like designer gowns." The crowd went wild. Even Chief Morgan's lawyer covered his mouth to hide a smile. As Madam Janet disappeared through the doors, Lydia turned to David. He met her gaze. Quiet, patient, strong. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with leftover electricity. David exhaled and said softly, "Lydia, I release you from this arrangement. You owe me nothing. Your brother is free. Janet's power is finished. You can walk out right now and live your life as you choose." He paused, eyes locked on hers. "But if you decide to stay, it will be as my equal, not my shield, not my pawn, my partner." The room stilled again. Every woman watching leaned forward like they were in a Nollywood drama finale. Lydia stared at him, tears filling her eyes, not of sadness but of relief. She thought of the purple flowers she had embroidered on her gown, the ones she'd sewn the night she wanted to give up but didn't. "Then let's finish what we started," she said finally, smiling faintly. Not because of fear or power, but respect. The pastor, who had been standing awkwardly through the entire scandal, cleared his throat. "Well then," he said with a nervous laugh, "shall we continue? This time with a little less corruption and a lot more honesty?" Laughter broke out across the hall. The tension dissolved like smoke. David grinned, the kind of grin that melted away the hardened look he'd carried for years. "I do," he said, firm but warm. "And I do," Lydia whispered. The pastor lifted his Bible. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. May no evil mother-in-law prosper against you." The hall erupted in applause. This time it wasn't fake. Even the chandeliers seemed to shine brighter. Moments later, the ballroom had transformed. The fake smiles of Lagos socialites turned to genuine admiration, or maybe strategic networking, one can never tell. Politicians rushed to shake David's hand. Socialites posed beside Lydia for selfies, already captioning them, "Power couple, Lagos love, we were there." David leaned toward her and whispered, "You see them? They switch sides faster than NEPA light." Lydia chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm learning who not to become." Then the ballroom doors opened again. This time it wasn't trouble. It was Toby, freshly released, walking in with David's lawyer, a fierce-looking woman in a burgundy suit. Lydia dropped her champagne and ran to him, her gown dragging behind her like a movie scene. She hugged him tightly, tears spilling freely. "You're free," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're actually free." Toby smiled, his voice breaking. "They said you married a billionaire, that you exposed Madame Janet." Lydia looked back at David. "He exposed her," she said softly. "I just refused to be her weapon." Toby's eyes glistened. "You were never the trap, Lydia. You were the test she failed." The crowd clapped again, cameras flashing. Somewhere in the corner, the band started playing a soft Afrobeat love tune. The sound of Lagos life, chaos, joy, resilience, filled the air. Outside, the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the city gold. Inside, a poor tailor's daughter and an ex-convict turned CEO held hands. Proof that in Lagos, even the dirtiest secrets can't bury the truth forever. The wedding reception was supposed to be elegant. You know, the type where even the waiters wear bow ties and the champagne has more bubbles than the truth. But that day, it turned into a full-blown Lagos courtroom, without the wigs, but with plenty of drama. Lydia straightened Toby's tie. "Now eat real food," she whispered with a smile. "You've been surviving on stress and nonsense." At the far end of the hall, David's friends were setting up a table that looked more like a police evidence board than a wedding buffet. Files, photos, documents, everything. David Morgan, Tony's cousin and former ex-convict turned lawyer, cleared his throat, holding a microphone like a gospel preacher about to drop revelations. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice echoing through the hall, "you may want to record this. History is about to trend." Phones shot up immediately. "Lagos people don't miss gist," he continued, flipping through the papers. "For the past 15 years, Madame Janet Morgan has been running what we can best describe as a marriage cartel." Gasps filled the hall. Someone's jelly even tilted in shock. 12 arranged marriages, David went on, 8 through blackmail, 4 through pure manipulation, all ending with her family getting richer while the other side lost everything. A woman in a bright orange Asso Oak stood up. "My niece married into the Bello family because of her," she shouted, trembling. "When she tried to refuse, her father's company suddenly got audited. She had no choice but to marry to save him." Another man in an agbada that looked like it came with air conditioning stepped forward. "My nephew, too. After his forced marriage, Chief Morgan's company bought out his business. It was a trap disguised as a merger." A snobby-looking man, clearly one of Chief Morgan's business partners, scoffed. "All this is hearsay. You people are just jealous. Madame Janet helped people find good matches. That's not coercion." Lydia stepped forward before anyone could respond. Her voice was calm, but it sliced through the noise like a knife through hot puff-puff. "She threatened my brother with jail. She said poor people like me only exist to make the rich comfortable. She told me to humiliate my husband publicly, to prove I knew my place." Lydia turned to the man in agbada. "Tell me, does that sound like matchmaking to you?" Silence, thick silence. You could hear a pin drop or even the sound of Lagos traffic outside trying to mind its business. "She used my poverty as a weapon," Lydia continued. "She thought shame would silence me, but shame only works when you're alone. And today I am not alone." Someone started clapping from the back. Then another joined. Within seconds, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. Genuine, emotional. No one was pretending anymore. David raised his hand. "If you or someone you know has been manipulated or forced into a marriage under Madame Janet's network, contact my office. We are building a case, and we're not stopping till every last person involved is exposed." Phones came alive. People started calling relatives. "Auntie Bose, that woman that forced you to marry your ex-husband, she's trending now, oh! It's payback time." By the time the band struck up the first song, a slow Afrobeats remix started playing. The whole wedding had turned into a viral moment. 3 hashtags flooded social media: billionaire wedding scandal, justice for Lydia, and Janet Morgan exposed. Someone live-streamed Madame Janet's arrest, another recorded the evidence board. By evening, blogs went crazy. Lydia's phone almost melted from the notifications. Messages poured in from classmates, clients, total strangers. Then one from her old teacher, Mr. Obiora. I watched the video. You were always brave. I was just too blind to see it. Congratulations on your freedom. Near midnight, when most guests had left, Mama Grace, the old churchwoman who practically raised Lydia, approached with a wrapped brown package. Your mother left this before she died, she said softly. Told me to give it to you on your wedding day. Lydia's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a small, worn-out leather journal. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages. The first line hit her like electricity. Lydia, my daughter of strength. Marriage is not rescue, it's partnership. Never let anyone tell you you're incomplete. Her voice cracked as she read aloud. The purple flowers on my wedding dress were for remembrance. Even when we don't choose our circumstances, we can still choose what we create within them. Love deeply. Forgive freely, but never apologize for taking up space in this world. Tears rolled down faces across the room. Lydia touched the small purple embroidery on her own dress. She had stitched herself, unknowingly carrying her mother's legacy. Tony's eyes glistened. This is your inheritance, Lydia. Not poverty, not pain, but courage. Sister Grace nodded. Your mama would be so proud. You've taken up the space they tried to steal from her. The next morning, Madam Janet's phone records leaked. They linked her to judges, corporate lawyers, and politicians. Chief Morgan quickly issued a statement. I condemn my wife's actions and hereby retire from all business affairs. The company's stocks dropped like Nipa during rainfall. David's cousin Tunde Morgan and state witness and 5 more wealthy families were dragged into the scandal. Lagos elite was on fire. Weeks later, Lydia appeared on a popular morning show. She wore a simple lavender top she'd sewn herself, her mother's bracelet shining faintly. The anchor leaned forward. People say you trapped a billionaire to escape poverty, that you used your brother's arrest to marry up. What do you say to that? Lydia smiled faintly. Madam Janet counted on me being too ashamed to speak. She thought people would blame the poor girl, not the powerful woman who created the trap. If anyone is watching this and someone is using your poverty or family against you, speak up. The shame is not yours. Then the next day, Janet Morgan invited Lydia for discussion at the cell. She turned to Lydia and said, I told myself I was helping people, she said quietly, voice shaking. But I was building cages. My daughter told me she's been in therapy for 5 years because of me. She was only 19 when I forced her to marry a man twice her age. I am sorry for lives I have destroyed, for the lives I have affected negatively. She pushed a check across the table. 5 million. It won't undo anything, but it's what I can offer. Lydia looked at her, calm and composed. Why did you do it? Power, Janet said. I grew up poor too. I married rich and spent my whole life afraid someone would take it away. So I controlled everyone until I became the monster I feared. Lydia nodded slowly. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean we'll ever be friends. This chapter ends here. She picked up the check and handed it to Toby, his ever-faithful brother. Use it to start a scholarship for orphaned girls learning a trade. They'll never know your name, only that someone decided to make amends. Janet burst into tears. Thank you for being merciful. Lydia stood. I'm not being merciful to you. I'm freeing myself. You don't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. Outside, Lagos traffic was honking as usual. A hawker passed with a tray of gala and la casera balanced on his head, because no matter how wild the drama, Lagos must go on. As Lydia walked out, she smiled faintly, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She felt unstoppable. Months passed after that unforgettable showdown. The day Lydia turned a wedding hall into a battlefield for truth and walked out with her dignity brighter than any diamond. Lagos didn't forget her name. Neither did the world. But Lydia? She wasn't chasing fame. She was building purpose. After the storm settled, life quietly began to bloom again, the kind of peace that doesn't come from silence, but from victory hard-earned. Lydia and David Morgan, yes, David Morgan, the once feared ex-convict, now her fiercest ally and husband, didn't just live happily ever after. They lived meaningfully ever after. Their story became the talk of Lagos Island. People whispered it in salons, gisted about it in Danfo buses, and shared it over suya and malt at night. You see that woman way humble Chief Morgan's wife? She's now running an organisation, helping orphans and poor girls. But behind the public admiration was a couple who worked like their lives depended on it. Their home wasn't just a mansion, it was a hub of second chances. The large compound on Victoria Island buzzed with laughter, music, and sometimes chaos. The front gate carried a bold sign. The Resilience Foundation, every girl deserves a voice. Every morning, girls in neatly pressed uniforms trooped in, orphans, dropouts, survivors of arranged marriages, all carrying stories stitched with pain and hope. Lydia would welcome each one personally, calling them my daughters. Don't just sew dresses, she would say, guiding trembling hands over a sewing machine. Sew your destiny. Every stitch is a declaration that you will not be small. David, with his calm but firm presence, handled the business side, training boys in carpentry, mechanics, and digital skills. He always said, "Nobody should suffer just because life gave them a rough start. I know what it means to be written off." Together, they became something Lagos had rarely seen, a power couple that actually cared. From victims to voices. Within a year, their foundation had sponsored 120 girls in vocational training and helped 30 of them start small businesses. Their social media pages exploded with testimonials. One girl, Precious, who once begged at Oberlende Bridge, now ran a tailoring shop called Threads of Hope. Another, Blessing, became a fashion designer whose dresses were worn by celebrities on red carpets. Each graduation ceremony was an event, full of music, laughter, and tears. David would always say, when Lydia walks into the hall, even the walls clap. And it was true, her presence carried warmth that made everyone feel seen. At home, Lydia and David's love wasn't the fairy tale type. It was real, Nigerian style, full of teasing, laughter, and sarcasm. "David," Lydia would call out from her workshop. "Did you eat?" He'd grin from the living room. "Depends. Are you asking because you cooked or because you want me to confess?" "Both," she'd reply, rolling her eyes. "You better not be eating that nonsense Mama Nkechi sells by the gate again." "Ah! You mean the amala that tastes like heaven?" "Guilty as charged." They laughed easily. Two people who had fought different wars but ended up on the same side. Sometimes they'd sit on the balcony at night, watching the city lights twinkle like fireflies over the lagoon. David would whisper, "Remember when the world called me an ex-convict and called you a mistake?" Lydia would smile softly. "Now they call us hope. That's what happens when you refuse to stay in the box they built for you." One Sunday morning, while Lydia was preparing breakfast for their foundation students, the gate security ran in, out of breath. "Madam, Chief Morgan Day outside!" The room froze. Everyone knew the name, the man who once turned his back on the truth to protect his wife's lies. Lydia exchanged glances with David. "Let him in." The old man walked in slowly, supported by a walking stick, humility replacing the pride that once filled his eyes. "I came to apologize," Chief Morgan said, his voice weak. "You changed my son, you liberated my daughter, you changed everything I thought I knew about honor, and you reminded me what real wealth is." Lydia offered him a seat. "Chief, we've moved on, but thank you." "I know," he said, smiling faintly. "That's why I came. I want to donate this." He slid an envelope across the table. It contained documents, ownership transfer of one of his companies. "For the foundation," he said. "Let it keep changing lives even after I'm gone." Lydia stood silent for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Chief. May your legacy begin again here." That day, the foundation expanded into 3 branches across Lagos: Surulere, Yaba, and Lekki. Lydia Morgan, the legend of Lagos. Years later, when journalists came to interview her, Lydia would laugh and say, "Me? I just wanted to sew and mind my business. But Lagos refused to let me rest." The interviewer would chuckle. "And now look at you, the woman who made justice fashionable." David would tease her later. "You know you're trending again, right?" "Ah!" Lydia would laugh. "I trend for good things, please. No scandal attached." The couple became mentors to many, not just because of their success, but because of their humility. Lydia often reminded her students, "You can come from nothing and still change the world. Just don't forget to laugh while you're doing it." One evening, after another long day, Lydia and David stood on their balcony overlooking the city that had once tried to break them. The sound of distant traffic mixed with laughter from the girls' dormitory below. David slipped his arm around her. "We did good, Lydia." She leaned into him, smiling. No, we're still doing good. The story doesn't end when the battle is won. It continues every time one of those girls finds her wings. He kissed her forehead. Then let's keep writing it. The Lagos night hummed, alive and golden. Below them, the streetlights flickered like stars fallen to earth. Imperfect, stubborn, but shining anyway. And so, Lydia and David Morgan didn't just live happily ever after. They lived boldly, loudly, and for others. Because, for them, love wasn't just something to feel, it was something to do. Hello, bestie. Sometimes life doesn't hand you gold, it hands you pain, poverty, and rejection. But like Lydia Morgan, you can turn pain into purpose, rejection into redirection, and brokenness into beauty. They said she was too poor, too ordinary, too small to matter, but she built an empire, not with money, but with courage, compassion, and a stubborn refusal to give up. Lydia and David didn't wait for the world to change. They became the change. Moral lesson: no matter where life throws you, stand tall and keep sowing your destiny. Don't let anyone use your poverty, your past, or your mistakes to define your future. Because the real power isn't in titles or wealth, it's in how you rise and how many people rise with you. Remember, forgiveness frees your heart and kindness multiplies your strength. So besties, if Lydia's story touched your heart, drop a love emoji in the comments. Tell me, what lesson did you learn today? Would you forgive someone who once destroyed your peace like Lydia did? And please don't forget to like, share and subscribe so more people can hear stories that heal, inspire and remind us that no matter how tough life gets, there's always hope.